This is Tommy's Outdoors 117. And today we are staying in Alaskan theme, and we are going to talk mainly about fisheries management and human-wildlife conflict as it pertains to fishing. And in the second part of the podcast, we are going to talk about fish carcass handling and how to handle fish once you catch it so the meat is of the best quality. So that part might be very interesting to anglers out there. So our guests to discuss these subjects are Sena and Rich Wheeler. They are third-generation fishing family, and they're not only fishing, but they're also running a business called Sena Sea, and the link is in the description of the show, where they're supplying fish directly from their boat straight to your door. Well, I understand that my European listeners, which arguably most of you are listening to this podcast from Europe, might not avail for this service. But there is all you American listeners. I know you out there is about 20% our listeners are in America, and the episodes like this, probably more. You can check out Sena Sea and order your package of fresh fish. But for everybody else, and mainly for the environmental aspect of this podcast, in the first part, we focused on fisheries management, human-wildlife conflict, and how does this look in Alaska. I had an opportunity to ask questions because many times on my podcast, it came up that America has a gold standard in fisheries management and fishing management. So I really welcome the opportunity to dig a little deeper and find out. So folks, that's it. I'm sure you will enjoy this episode of the podcast. And as usual, if you want to help me and support the podcast, leave the rating, 5-star rating, either on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's very helpful. And you can, if you want to go an extra mile, you can buy me a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/Tommy's Outdoors. The link is in the description of the show, as always. And now, without delaying that any further, Sena and Rich Wheeler and Sena Sea. Sena and Rich Wheeler, welcome to Tommy's Outdoors. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Wow. Folks, you are third-generation fishing family from Alaska. Well, we had a little bit of a discussion where you're from. So maybe you just give us a little introduction.
We're from Washington State, the Seattle area, so the Pacific Northwest. And we have been fishing generations from there. So my grandfather Lars immigrated from Norway to Ballard, and this is it's a little town of Norwegian immigrants in the Seattle area. So it's a lot of fishing families, and at the time there was a lot of Norwegian spoke there, and so he came over and did that, and as his brothers came over, they all got a boat and started long lining. They would fish from Alaska all the way down. We have the old fishing logs. They would fish from Alaska down to Mexico. So they fished quite a bit and really kind of started the family that way. My dad entered the family a lot like Rich. He was the son-in-law of my mom's husband. And he carried on the tradition. My uncles fished, my dad fished, and then Rich married into the family, and he started fishing on my dad's boat, broke in on my dad's boat, which was, they fished the old Norwegian traditional ways. So he got to break in and kind of learn those ropes, which, nowadays is, you don't see as much anymore. So it's kind of a special way to start with with that traditional in breaking. And then he fishes for salmon, and he does the long lining as well. And he's been doing that for how long?
This is my 24th year.
24 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And do you think it gave you any sort of advantage or different viewpoint when you were starting in this sort of like a traditional, because I presume it was like a traditional old school way of fishing?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hands down. The way that I was brought into the fishery was very traditional in the sense that, a lot of pride in your work. And I will tell you that it was really hard. It was, the term greenhorn wasn't used as a really uplifting thing. And I earned, my stripes, I guess, more or less. And today, looking back on it, I'm very thankful for it. These guys really, they were hard on me, but taught me a trade that today, I feel like I can get on any boat and really be a participant in what we're doing. And I have a trade that I can always provide for my family too.
And a work ethic.
Yeah.
It's a way of working. What's my dad's quote about the son-in-law?
Which one?
The skipper's daughter.
There's nothing lower than the skipper's daughter's boyfriend. And that's what
Ouch.
Yeah. And I was reminded quite often as spittle is coming at my face. And
he was a yeller too.
Yeah, he was a real yeller. And so, it was, and I was reminded by the crew. And so there was obviously nepotism runs deep in any fishing community or family. And there was no difference in ours. And, I'm very honored for the opportunity, but I worked for, everything that we got from there.
So there was like a small traditional boat, and then you kind of move on from this to run your own business. And I guess
yeah, it was really pretty interesting in the sense that Sena's dad was a real visionary guy and very generous and very thankful to the crew that he had. And he retired at a really early age and was able to set his crew and myself up for success and we were, this whole IFQ concept was new. It just was incepted in 1995.
What is IFQ?
Individual fishing quota.
Okay.
So, which is set by the federal government. We know how many pounds I get to go out and catch. And, it's a whole complicated thing on how it was all developed. But Sena's dad, I think it was 99, 2000, had announced that he was going to retire, and the crew bought, his quota, and then we bought the boat, and we all co-opted our stuff together and made a go of it. And, it was really successful. And it's a difficult, hard business to be because there's, a certain pecking order. There's a reason that there's called a captain, because somebody has to be in charge. And, so it all flowed really well. And we did it for about 12 years. And then I moved on, and I took my quota with me, and, was very thankful, and, to the guys on the Alrita and everything else.
And like you're doing this thing that you're kind of letting people, allowing or enabling people, I guess is the word, to get a fish straight from the boat to their door and to their table.
Yeah.
And there's, I almost feel like there's like 2 episodes of the podcast in one, because I have a lot of questions related to, environmental stuff and the fishing itself, but then also about the, fish and nutrition and preparing fish and all that. So, we'll get to all that. You mentioned this individual fishing quotas. So this is something I am really interested in, and especially, to majority of my listeners who are based in Europe. I can't even count episodes in the podcast where we said, well, really the way the fishery is managed and the environment is managed and fishing is managed in the United States, it's like a gold standard. It's, I'm sure there are, bad and ugly to that as well. But, as far as I'm concerned, and this, like I said, came up many times on my podcast. And, I had on the podcast both commercial fishermen who are still, fishing on trawlers, as well as, ex-commercial fishermen who are now running charter boats for anglers. And they were all in agreement with that. So can you lay it out to us, how are the how the fisheries are managed, how those quotas are decided, and then, which is probably the most significant aspect of it, how it is being enforced. That the quotas are not being overfished.
So they go out, and the federal government is heavily involved in these fisheries, and not only that, but the state of Alaska is where I fish. And first, I started my career. I fished off the coast of Washington for several years, for about 12 of my years, and where it was managed under the federal government also.
And that's combo. You would do Washington and Alaska.
Yeah. And one system was more of a tier, where you would, it could go up and down. Whereas up in Alaska, it was an IFQ, the individual fishing quota, that was set by the federal government. They took recommendations from their scientists and everybody else there. The Halibut Commission is involved particularly for halibut. This is a commission that has been underway for well over 100 years now.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of science behind this, and how they arrive at the final TAC, which is TAC, which is a total allowable catch. I'm not going to BS you and tell you that I understand it completely, but they have a formula, and they've done a fairly decent job of managing the fishery, in my opinion. I think that there's some things right now happening out in the ocean that, in my short career, and I'm going to compare that to Sena's dad's career at this point, and there are changes and differences in the ocean, but the government has really done a good job of staying out ahead of it, and doing things such as letting us fish with pots right now, and we're seeing an absolute boom right now with our black cod. There's so much black cod out in the ocean right now. Halibut is really well managed and doing really well. So it's cyclical. It comes, it ebbs and flows. Some years are really good, and then we might string together 5 or 6 years of really good fishing, and they do a good job of adjusting accordingly.
And really, I guess just the 10,000 feet view is, I think of it as a pie. The total allocation, what they're doing is, they're increasing or decreasing the total allocation each year. So they're using whatever data they can get. A lot of it is catch data, and how long it took to catch that fish, or where it was caught. The ocean is cut into sections, and then each year we find out before the fishing season if our quota. So everybody owns their own quota. You have like a mortgage you pay on it. And so everybody owns a slice of the pie is kind of the way I think of it. So each year they take the pie and say, well, it's 10% bigger based on our data, or it's 10% smaller based on our data. So every fisherman, whether you own a tiny slice or a big slice, it's just all moving proportionately. So that in that way, they can do this total allowable catch, the TAC you're talking about, and it kind of affects everybody's slice of the pie, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Now this is particularly for halibut and black cod.
And then salmon is totally different.
Yeah, and salmon is managed under a different management and by a different government agency.
And tell me, folks, how does it work? When the fishery commission or whatever the name of that body is works on these quotas, are they subject to lobbying and pressures from different pressure groups, or is it pretty much like closed off, and they're coming out based on only science, or whether it's a science plus input of like I said, pressure groups who lobbying and might impact that, because that's a I guess aspect which I personally and not personally even, but is the aspect that doesn't work that well, especially in the EU, where fishing quota is one and the scientific evidence is one, and then the quota is getting set up like 4 times 5 times over scientific recommendation because of the lobbying, because of the pressure groups and so on. So I'm really curious how that works.
Well, as I wring my hands to try to figure this answer out diplomatically, I would probably wager that I'm probably more on the side of what you're thinking than not. And I think that there is some definite lobbying going on because there's a lot of money at stake here. And I think that oftentimes it's probably true. There is some lobbying going on, and I don't want to specifically pick on any specific fishery because I'm just making an educated guess.
Right.
But I think that there is.
But
I
it's
think that
not like it goes up every year, regardless of the data.
I think that there's some policies that happen that are taken in that are really controversial and that might not be the best for every single fishery out there. And this bycatch thing that we're dealing with, whether it's king salmon, halibut, or blackcod, it's a really hot topic, and there's a lot at stake here. There's livelihoods at stake. There's the environment at stake, and so it's really challenging. And I won't bullshit you and tell you that I understand it completely.
Yeah, this is always messy situation, and there's a lot of things going on behind the closed doors. And like you said, I think it's inevitable that some of that is going on always, especially like you say, where there's a lot of money at stake. But then there's always the other question, how much, whether those quotas are kind of pushed, one or the other side, 15%, or they push like 400%.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, in that, I will say that I am involved in the Copper River salmon fishery, where my livelihood is never considered, and the preservation of the run is always first at hand.
And that's managed by Alaska.
And that is managed by Alaska, which is a really, and as we're having this conversation, I feel like a ping pong ball right now because I'm on, kind of one end of the extreme to the other end. And we try to find our balance somewhere in the middle. And it's really challenging at times because I really feel that, my ability to go out and fish with a gill net offers scientific data to the scientists. And at times I might really disagree very handedly with the scientists because we're not allowed to go out and fish. And we don't even know what's going up the rivers until 7 days later when they hit the first sonar.
Well, and that's the thing. The salmon is managed totally different than the halibut and the halibut and blackcod are in the middle of the ocean on the bottom of the ocean. So the data you can get for them is really different. It's very deep. Then you have salmon that's managed for one thing by Alaska State and has always been managed for conservation and for sustainability. Mm-hmm. And then the fact that salmon is counted as it returns into the river. So they can actually count the fish as they're returning, but they can't count them out in the ocean. So the type of data that they're managing with on salmon is completely different than the halibut and the blackcod because they're doing it on migration, on the return. So they're counting the salmon going upriver. So it's all about escapement and how many salmon have gone upriver. So they're actually managing it real time with actual numbers of salmon going upriver. And then that turns on or off the fishing that's happening downriver. So it's and that's definitely not a quota system. It's an open and closed system, depending on the actual numbers of the return. So they're managed really differently, which is good because they're caught. The data comes in really differently.
Right. Gotcha. Can you briefly explain that bycatch? Because I haven't heard like what's a particular regulation. I know about the bycatch that we're the issue that is going on here, which is probably similar, where when you catch the fish that above your quota, you need to basically discard the fish. And then on one hand, it's supposed to discourage of fishing above the quota, but then you essentially that fish is dead anyway. Then why you're discarding? Is that a similar thing?
Very similar. But we can go out and buy. You can sell off your bycatch or the level of what you can catch your bycatch. So there's a lot of different ways around it, which is I think the real frustrating part for myself. that's frustrated maybe with the whole entire system. We're talking about lobbyists at that point, and that's the one area that they seem to have the grip in, um, in my opinion.
On the bycatch.
Yeah. It's like and here again, I don't want to pick on any specific fishery, but possibly trawlers might catch a large number of king salmon. But this is an industry that also, to the federal government and to the state of Alaska. I mean, these people are heavily regulated with, observers. So I'm sure that by the time this information gets to me, it's, folklore at this time, where they've caught, 75,000, copper river king salmon, and, they're in the bottom of their trawl and everything else. And how factual that is, I'm to be quite fair and honest, I would probably err on the side of it's probably not happening to that extent. But I do think that there's probably some abuse that has happened. But I don't know.
And you mentioned trawlers, so and what I'm exploring here, I'm really interested in similarities, or what's similar or what's different. So you're obviously operator of a small boat. I guess it's counted as a small boat, and I'm kind of using terminology that I'm familiar with, and I'm not, feel free to correct my terminology, how you folks speak about it. But I remember that I had on a podcast a trawler man, and we talked about conflict with seals in particular in Ireland, which is quite big, and there is a clear, I would say, conflict here between owners and operators of small boats and so-called big boats, where there's the quota, and there's like a big factory corporations, almost those big boats, and how much quota is that also a thing? Is that also like a point of friction between small operators and quote unquote big boats, or does it work differently?
I think it works differently. The system is set up to be an advantage to each vessel size, and there's different classifications. Like for instance, this IFQ. There's different vessel sizes. Like we have A shares, which are for big boats, B shares, which are for 60 feet or more. And then you have C shares, which are below 60 feet, and then you have D shares, which are I think 35 and below, or something like that. So they're set up, and really the whole system is pretty ingenious for the fact that it gives every user group an opportunity. And I've never felt like I'm out there competing with a 125-foot vessel. That's just me personally, and the people that I fish with have never felt that way either. So it's we kind of fish in different areas too. Sometimes we might be out. I think I've been out fishing off the coast of Washington behind a trawler and a catcher processor, and a lot of our fish are coming up with the heads of a perch or something like that. But beyond that, not very limited access or interaction with the big boats.
No, and I think that the system that you just described is so much more sophisticated that it allows for that. I remember it was probably last year. I'm probably gonna butcher the numbers, but it was something like 5 biggest boats were allocated like 80% of a catch quota, and all the rest had a remaining 20%, which it was discussed on the political level. Like how is it possible like a 5 biggest operators have 80% of a quota, right? So it's good to hear that at least you don't have these sort of issues. And listen, and just that's just a last, I think, question in this vein. You mentioned that those catches, or I guess these things are supervised and watched. And can you tell us how does that work? Because the last thing I know, I heard is like each boat has like a number on the roof, on the wheelhouse, and then there's a like a air from the air, either airplanes or whatever, checking who's out and who's fishing. which is, again, something that's completely not happening here. So can you explain that, how the supervision and how the enforcement of those quotas work? Because I guess that's another thing, right? You can have the best quota system in the world, but then if nobody can check that and actually enforce, then, it's...
Yeah. So we oftentimes we have an observer that comes out with us, and when you come into port, you call a number, and it's a random. You get an observer this trip. So
really?
Yep.
So
is there actually a guy on the boat?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so now they're because of and this has been a real interesting process. There's so many things that in my 24 years of fishing, in my short career, that this whole industry has really changed, and it's cool. And because we have vessel monitoring systems on the boat now, which are cameras. As soon as the hydraulics come on, the camera comes on, and then it's filming every fish that comes aboard. And you have to take this hard drive and send it to them at the end of the trip, and then somebody goes and reviews it. And so, and then if you don't have that system, you can opt to have an observer with you, which is another body on the boat, which is it's a little bit cumbersome at times. Maybe from a smaller boat.
Hey, what is this guy doing here?
Yeah.
And they get a bunk, they get fed.
Yeah.
They're
just another crew, another body on the boat that takes up space. So they are there, and so we'll get observed probably as many as, well, it depends. It's all random anyways. But I've been on boats where we've had observers for 3 or 4 trips. So, and they're up counting hooks, counting the bycatch, really, measuring, and they're contracted with the federal government to, return this data. And so it's real time data collection. It's something that when we have an observer come aboard, nobody's like jumping up and down going, yes, we got an observer. But, it's one of these things, today it's something as we're talking about, I'm proud of it, that the state of Alaska and the federal government, we do this.
And it's normal. It's normal to get an observer. It's not a big, huge deal. It's just, they do what they do.
And sometimes we get a really cool observer, and that somebody new to grin at, particularly if you've been with these, jackasses for, 5 or 6 weeks, a new face to grin at, and somebody to tell you a new joke. And, and so it's fun.
Wow, I didn't realize it goes to this length, and I think this is the biggest thing, to actually have a method of enforcement and observing this.
So there's a difference right there. They're not enforcement. They're not the fish police coming out with you, but they're just there to observe and then report back. So there's they're not going to tell you, no, you cannot set there, or anything like that. I've heard stories that happening, but really, they're just there to observe.
And they're collecting the data.
But then
it's how many hooks, and how much fish. So it's probably data on multiple levels, but some of which must funnel to the quota system.
Absolutely,
for the next year. They're looking at how much effort it takes to get that quota. They can look at the previous year and go, well, all the fish was caught, but was it caught in 1 month, or was everybody out there for months at a time trying to catch it? So that like Rich is talking about, how many hooks were in the water per fish and things. So it's they're looking at bycatch and all kinds of things, but they're also collecting that catch data, right? Mm-hmm. If that's fair. And then they're looking at they have planes and stuff.
Yeah, not as much for the Coast Guard might be out there cruising around, checking your documentation and make sure that your safety stuff is all in order, and you're not out there endangering crewmen's lives and everything.
And then for salmon, which is not the quota system, they'll have openings and closures. So they'll fly over and they'll be looking for nets in the water and nets out of the water, because there's timelines.
Yeah, net length of nets and everything else.
So, but I guess the observer, will observe if you would be doing something illegal, or someone would be doing something illegal. Then the observer will obviously observe, and then someone else will come and enforce.
Exactly. Then you'll get a ticket in the mail. And so
you get a ticket in the
and
mail.
you don't want to mess with an observer. I mean, it is like a federal law. You do not mess with these people. You are as nice as pie to them. and you really treat these people with the utmost respect.
And listen, is there also a thing going on that fishermen are treated a little bit like a bad guys by environmental lobbies, that like an environmentalists who
Oh,
love
sure,
nature and all that, and just
sure.
they just don't like fishermen, like, oh, they're depleting our rivers and our seas.
I'd say there's a general assumption sometimes that we fight, just that, oh, you're a fisherman, you're not, you can't be an environmentalist, or you can't be pro sustainability. And it's like, well, that's just really short-sighted thinking. If you're in our world of fishing families, we care about sustainability. We want to fish for generations. So fishermen are, when you're up fishing in Alaska, it could be hot for 8 days in a row, and people, oh, no, 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 it's too hot, what about this? I mean, everybody cares about the fish and what's going on and sustainability, and they want fish returning year after year as much or more than anybody else does. So I think that there's this kind of common assumption that fishermen in general, just want to catch as much fish as they can. But really, the world we live in, when you're dealing with fishing families and career fishermen, generational, that's not the idea. The idea is to keep their livelihood going, which depends on healthy stocks of fish. So everything we found, fishermen always want healthy stocks. So I think that that's the common assumption, and is really what we find is people are very much more distant from the fishing industry making that assumption. Plus, I think that sometimes I feel like just the terminology, whereas it's all called commercial fishing. When Rich is fishing for salmon, he's on a small boat himself or with his family, one guy, and these are all small boats. There's no big boats catching salmon. There's not factory trawlers or anything like that. Yeah, it's called commercial fishing, and you can show images of really, really big boats, and that's the same term. So to me, some of it is very much terminology, where it would be really nice to kind of have this small boat fishing, or this different terminology for what we do.
You hit the nail in the head. You hit the nail in the head, because this is, and again, I ask this question because I'm curious about it, with all the regulations and observers and all that you just described. I would imagine that could mitigate that conflict a little bit. But you hit the nail in the head, that often this is like all these feckers emptying the oceans, and then you have super trawler that hoovers everything, right? And then you have a small boat operators like you folks, right? Like people who fish off the coast of the fishing village that I live, and they are as affected, and they as much hate those big super trawlers that are not even they're coming from different countries, or like a I think Dutch, or they're only operated, like they have like a Dutch flag or Lithuanian flag, and they're going to Australia or somewhere, and like everybody knows, like once this trawler is on in these waters, then there's no point going out there fishing, and the fisherman knows that. So this is very important distinction, and especially since a lot of people very environmentally minded are listening to this podcast. I think it's a good moment to actually like you said, you folks are almost closer to recreational fisher anglers who are really want this fish to keep coming, rather than the operators who just they can move halfway across the world, you know hoover everything and move on to the next big thing, right?
Right.
So
And I don't know, do you see those big boats? I don't
Very
know.
seldom. I mean, we're out in the Gulf. It happens. We have the trawlers are going to be, of course, the easiest low hanging fruit to pick on, and we do see them out there, and it is frustrating, just for the fact that as you say, they do hoover everything, and we don't know the environmental impact that at the end of the day that they have. I know that there's some technology that that industry is using to lower their impact on going over the bottom. But it's generally, I'm respectful of other fishermen. I've had, I think, one guy that I was introduced to here recently that he was talking to me like, hey, I was wearing a sweatshirt that had some fishing whatever, and he figured out that I was a fisherman, and he comes and talks to me, and he says, oh yeah, I work on for this big company. We work on a trawler, and I'm just like, I turn away and just walk away. I was just like, I don't even want to talk to you. So, and that's me not representing my company or Sena Sea or anything like that. It's just my personal, I was just like, I don't really think much of you.
Yeah, in our world, we could kind of draw that line,
that distinction.
Yeah,
for sure. But they also subject to the same regulations, or like this A class or whatever that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, but there's the slippery slope with this bycatch, and that's where these guys have figured out what to do and how to do it. And
so like they're getting more bycatch than. And they can sell that.
Yeah, I guess, like no system is perfect. No system is perfect. It's like a crime. It's in every country, right? It's just a question how much and how often, right? So
and perfection takes time. For instance, in my career here, I started fishing, and the sperm whales were a really big deal, and they would lay up against the boat, when we're hauling gear.
They're waiting for the fish.
Yeah, and it was a real cool deal, to see this majestic, massive mammal just right there. You could reach out and touch them, and and then they learn how to take the fish off our hooks, off our lines, and then they really learn how to hurt us and take everything. And then it took a long time for the federal government to figure out, and I couldn't even begin to understand how much data it took for them to figure out how much fish that they're actually eating. And now we can fish with pots. So now our interaction with this mammal is really limited, and it's a great way to fish.
Wow. But and this is like excellent segue now to my next question, because you already mentioned like a human wildlife conflict. So like the first one, I guess it was a sperm whale, which is the last species I would expect you fishermen get in conflict with. But I guess if there is it a big problem overall? Because then again, this is another kind of like a friction point and tension between environmentalists and a fisherman.
Yeah. Yep.
With like I said, I discussed that in length in a podcast, conflict with seals here, and why I'm so happy to have you on the podcast is that I think that the voice of fishermen and like the other side is not often heard, especially on a kind of environmental podcast, because it's usually the side of environmentalist heard. And I had a lot of kind of feedback of like, oh, I never thought about that. It's great to actually hear the other side, where again, like these people are really affected by in this case by seals. So tell me how that works. Is that the big issue? Is it small issue? Is it somewhere in between? Is there a lot of conflict?
And it took to tell you that it would take months out of a man's life to go back and rebait that hook that fish, that sperm whale has taken off that hook, is not an exaggeration.
Well, the whale would find the bow, and then you can't move away, right? It's
these whales
follow you around.
Yeah, they got it dialed in to what's happening, and there's so much science behind this, and everything I'm going to tell you is things that I've heard and by really educated people. But these whales hear you put your boat into gear 10 or 15 miles away, and they hear the food train coming.
The way you do it when you're about to fish, they know.
Yeah. And it's not the hydraulic, it's the propulsion of your boat going in and out of gear that notifies every fish around or whale around that it's time to come eat. So, here
like
we're
a dinner
fishing.
bell.
Yeah, we're fishing on the continental shelf on the seamounts, and all these whales are hanging out on the edge, and they come and just start. They go down your line, just like grapes, and this huge, 70-foot whale plucking off little black cod one by one,
Oh,
and
jeez.
it was really, really frustrating. And there was nothing you could do, nothing. You
Yeah.
you could run for 10 days and they would still follow you. These were very persistent and very smart mammals.
And you would just go in.
Yeah,
I mean, they would just cancel the once that's happening. They just have to go in.
Yeah, one whale is manageable. Two whales is you're kind of like getting grumpy. Three whales, go take a nap. Yeah, and four whales, it's done. It's like now we're feeding the whales, and it's awful. And so now we can fish with pots, and it took a long time to figure it out. And out of no discredit to the federal government for taking as long, because there's a lot of things involved with this. This is there's a lot of systems at play here. I'm a real big advocate for it, but also I can see the downside too. So, but it's
the pots is clever because they're still on a long line, and then if you imagine a crab pot for every piece of bait, it's basically protected by a pot that the fish can swim into, and so it's pretty smart because then you're not sort of continuing to train these whales. They can go off and do their whale thing.
Yeah, and we can do our thing because it's a learned behavior. Right. I mean, obviously,
did they still try to pick them up from those spots, and then they just can't?
They're just so dang confused, and it's probably the greatest thing to see one of these big bastards swimming away. Yes, thank you. And the pot I mean, there's so much black cod right now. I mean, it's just like it's awesome, and the quota is huge, and it's amazing. And to bring up a pot with 100 black cod, and it's great, and we didn't feed a whale along the way. So
yeah, I mean, like all the fishermen who think that the seals are the problem, there you have a big problem, like 70 feet sperm whale. That is the problem.
That is a problem. Yeah. Now seals, on the other hand, that's another fun topic, and I have some real interesting.
Yeah, please.
So the Marine Conservatory, what is it? The Marine Mammal Conservatory Act or something. I'm not remembering the
Marine
acronym.
Mammal something.
Yeah, it's there are so many seals and sea lions up in Alaska now that it's somewhat outlived its usefulness, and the balance is out of whack right now.
That's the problem.
Yeah, up and down the west coast of Pacific Coast, personal properties are being damaged. They're really coming in groves, and starting down in San Francisco. I couldn't even imagine the hundreds of millions of dollars of property damage that this mammal has caused. You go to Astoria, and they have taken over harbors.
Oh, they get up on the floating docks, and they're vicious.
Yeah,
and there's so many, and they're huge.
Yeah,
we used to live down there. You could hear them we lived on the hill, and you could hear them down there barking, but you can't get by them.
Yeah.
And then at the locks, they can watch them just eating the salmon.
Yeah.
There's so many. Even if you take the fishing out of it, there's so many just now eating the salmon and kind of, decimating the salmon alone, just the seals. Then you get into the fishing aspect and them, pulling them out of the net. Yeah. It's just their amounts are so huge.
And there's nothing you can do. They are just one of the smartest, I call them tacticians. I mean, these seals, the sea lions are just absolute brutes. They'll just go, they don't care. They'll just rip holes and look at you and, they're barking at you. But the seals, they're smart. They're tacticians. They work in pairs of 6, and there'll be 3 at one end, 3 at the other end, and you can chase them all day long, and they're just laughing, eating your fish.
Wow.
So, just suck it. Not even eating your fish. They'll just, they're so smart that they just go up and bite a hole right in the neck and suck the eggs right out, and they're on to the next. So it's super frustrating, that part of it. But, part of what we do is we fish on hatchery fish that I personally, this is my contribution to my, this is such a socialized business anyway, that much like in the United States, we're reintroducing gray wolves into the environment, and a lot of these farmers get compensated for their lost sheep or livestock. Well, what's the difference between this mammal causing harm on my gear? I mean,
Right.
I couldn't even begin to tell you how many thousands of dollars I've spent, tens of thousands of dollars on net repair, and so
Yeah, that's interesting. With if we want them there, what about some compensation for the havoc they wreak?
Yeah, I mean, it's a real balance. I mean,
but also we're so concerned about the salmon, yet the numbers being out of whack. Just without fishing, just the number of salmon they eat.
And why those numbers are out of whack? Is it like a sharks, like a predators are gone, or like what happened?
Very much so. I think that humans were a predator to these creatures also at one time. And if you were to talk to the Alaska Fish and Game, which we had a big problem this past year with, the commissioner of the state of Alaska Fish and Game came into town and he talked to us and he said, the seals and sea lions are taking more than any sport fisherman and commercial fishermen. And, so things are so far out of whack right now because there's nobody that is hunting these animals anymore. Maybe the indigenous
because they're protected.
But and the indigenous people, it's just not as much a part of their culture anymore. And then the general population, we can't do anything. And
it's the same story. It's the same story. I'll put a link to the episode, to the conflict with seals, into the show notes of this episode. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but after the recording, I'll send you a link to that episode. You might find it interesting because different country, different place, but pretty much similar problems. And so obviously you guys, I presume, again by analogy, you guys are calling for some sort of a call or control of these animals, and those calls are falling on a deaf ears, or are they so much protected that you're not even calling for control because there's no point?
There's no point. There's nothing that we can do. It's so cyclical too. I mean, when there's a big run that comes in, of course these animals are going to follow that, and then we're left to, have interaction. There's not a single fisherman that I know that revels in the fact of he had an interaction with a marine mammal. It's just something that we don't even want. We don't want to see them. We don't want to, catch them in our nets, or we don't want them eating fish out of our nets. We don't want to be fishing where they're at. We don't want to go to their rookeries and hang out there, and anything else like that. It's just, but we're all after the same thing, and the analogy that Sena used earlier with, how big the pie is. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on this resource.
Man, this is all the same. This is all the same. How it works here is like a fisherman in Ireland. They're calling repeatedly for call. So again, seals are protected. They were at some point almost decimated, so they're protected. You can shoot them. You can't do anything. Fishermen are calling for call. Obviously, each time they're calling for call of seals, then environmental organizations are going all guns blazing. And there's this massive conflict. There are mechanisms, so-called in Ireland, it's called Section 42, that allows you to give permission to kill problem animal. But the problem is with that is that regulation was meant for deer, so you have to you have to it applies to a specific animal. So when a deer damages the forestry or damages the pasture or whatever else, there's a specific deer, and then the ranger comes in, so like, yep, that's a deer, put the Section 42, and that animal can be killed. With seal, as you know, you cannot pinpoint like, oh, this is the seal that is causing a problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Get that one over there.
Yeah, exactly. So this is ongoing thing, and so in that regard, it's pretty much similar. So what other is similar? I presume there's also illegal persecution of these animals, right?
Yeah. Which none of us agree with. I mean, Another example of how far out of whack the system is, and really at the end of the day, the only cure for it is money. Is the Columbia River. We're dealing with our orcas here in the Puget Sound that eat only king salmon. And these salmon run up the Columbia River. And in the way of these salmon are all these dams that are in the way, and there's been a lot of fish ladders added in, and so in our little town here, we even have king salmon, and we live way in eastern Washington, in the middle of the damn state, and then live on a tiny little river, and we have king salmon that come all the way up our river, and they find it successful when 250 of those king salmon return at the cost of over $6 million. And it's just really expensive. But now we go back up into how much fish has to be produced to get those 250 king salmon up the river when you have seals and sea lions.
How many fish you're producing for the seals?
Yeah, and that
get that
sit
much on
at the
top.
fish ladders at these dams that are just reaping havoc on this resource. I mean, it's because this is all, because here again we've kind of screwed stuff up and dammed up the river, and there's no free flow, and it's really
It's
tough.
hard to go backwards.
The balance is really, really hard, and it's not easy. And I don't envy, these fishing game, and I do think that these people have the best sides of both. And everybody's thinking about each other. Now the marine mammals right now have the upper hand because it's just something that it went so far. The pendulum swung so far over that they were almost brought to the brink of extinction. So we needed to do something. And so now they have the upper hand. It's time for us to be a little bit smarter and figure this out. And so
it's almost like a feel good story on one end that they're brought back from the extinction, but then it's like going other way. It's like, oh, right, and then it's
yeah. But then you have worries about orcas.
Yeah. Well, and in the big picture of life, we have also, we're talking about more dam removals on some of these local rivers around here. And I was kind of not really supportive of it. And then I had a friend sit me down and really kind of lay it out for me. And I consider mankind to be pretty intelligent people. And we can figure out how to get grain down the dam river better and more efficiently than in a barge. So let's challenge ourselves. And maybe the right thing to do is to remove these dams. And I am just a borrower of this space. This isn't mine. I want to leave this for my kids. And so there's, I think, a valid argument for a lot of that stuff.
This is super interesting. Okay, let's switch gears now to something a little bit lighter and something that a lot of people also will be interested in.
You want to talk about COVID?
Oh, he's joking.
Oh.
That's a different episode. There's a human-wildlife conflict with this tiny virus. Oh, but before we jump into fish and cooking and processing fish, one other thing that I want to ask you, it is something that you alluded to. I don't remember which one of you earlier on. The changes in the fishery compared to 20 years ago and even earlier, because surely you heard what Sena's father was telling you. How does it look like? Is the fishery and like a fish stocks are going down, or on the free fall, or they're stable, or how does health of the fishery looks like, and do you see any changes, and what do you think those changes are? What causes them?
And I'm going to jump in and speak to this specifically. Yeah. And I really think that right now things are good. Here at Bristol Bay is, they're just breaking record after record after record. And for what reason? Nobody knows.
On their returns.
Yeah,
returning
on their fish returns.
Salmon.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. In my lifetime, when we lived in Astoria, I happened to get to fish on the second largest return of coho salmon on the Columbia River. Why is that? Nobody knows. So there are things that are happening that are really positive, and it's not all negative. And the thing that we have become as humans, particularly in the United States, is we're instant gratification. and we want the information now, and we don't really want to take a look at the big picture of life. And so I'm really optimistic about the fish stocks, particularly in Alaska. But I do think that there are some things happening down here that, maybe not as favorable for fish returns, but it's happening. I mean, this is a pretty incredible, tough species, or fish are tough, and they will find a way to make it. We just need to get out of our way and let them do their business, and not screw up the environment.
Well, it's like you're saying with the black cod. I mean, you can see a drop and then you can see it bounce back. The levers that are being pulled do make a difference. They might not make a difference the next year, but in the grand scheme, where sometimes it feels so daunting. It's good to remember that.
Yeah. So
if we keep at it, it can make a difference.
Yeah. Like for instance, right now we're in a little bit of a crisis with our red king crab. And, this is my theory. This is a completely uneducated theory, but maybe it's because we have a lot of halibut out in the ocean that are eating the crab. So there's so many things are interwound, now, and I talked to you about the pots. And, so now here's my theory. This is Rich Wheeler as a fisherman thinking about this as he's back at his bait station. A pot goes down and it targets a specific species, a predator in the ocean, now swims into a pot and it is removed indiscriminately out of the ocean. Now, before we had hook and line, where if you bought the hook, or if you bit the hook, you indiscriminately died. Now we're just removing one species, one predator out of the ocean without any recourse to any other predator. So where's the balance? Eventually it might get out of whack.
It's more targeted because you can target with the size of the hole, you target with the depth, you target with the bait. But being more targeted, then you also have to go, okay, well, what's the effect of targeting so well on that species? Then what is that? What's the ricochet down the line effect? So targeting, I think, is always, it's good because you can pull back or you can move, but you still have to be aware of what you're doing. Anytime you're affecting one species, you're affecting the web of species.
And I think that to speaking out of turn, why it took so long for the federal government to enact pots, it's probably that. So there's a lot to this business, and there's a lot to sustainability, and I feel really fortunate that we live, in this nation that they do take it serious, and that oftentimes, it might take some time. The right things are always done, But that's me. I think both Sena and I choose to live in that world where we don't think everything's bad.
Yeah. Well, that's great, and every bit of positive information is, especially these days, is very good. So that's good. That's good to hear. Okay, listen, folks. So let's shift gears now and let's talk about actual fish and how you're. So Sena, I know you have a degree in master's degree in measuring fish and like measuring nutrients in the fish or omega-3. Tell us about it. Like, what that was natural choice for you, your father being fisherman, and it was like, yeah, I'm gonna go deep into the like a scientific aspect of fish consumption.
Well, it really for me it started with my degree in nutrition, and for me that was also just a really natural choice. My dad was a fisherman, but my mom owned a natural health food store, so we just grew up with healthy food and fish. That was just normal. So going into nutrition just felt really natural for me. Right when I was graduating, the way it's set up here is most nutritionists go into a dietetic field where you'd be in the hospital working for dietetics. So I did my internship in a hospital and realized, that's not really the route I wanted to go. So I took a left turn and went into the scientific route and went into food science to get my master's degree. And it's one of those things. I was really interested in just the science and the food and the nutrition in more of a scientific way. But when I went to get my master's degree, it was looking at, well, you have to get accepted by a professor that wants to do research and that kind of a thing. And I just saw a post from a professor in the fisheries, and he said he's looking for somebody that would be comfortable going on the boat, comfortable with the fisheries. And it was like, oh, one email, oh yeah, I fished with my dad on the summers, on the longline boat and things like that. And it was like, okay, done deal. So it was almost so easy. It was just, and a lot of things when it comes to fish in my life, it's just like, that's usually just the course that things go. So I was hired to do that and actually got a stipend or, my schooling paid for to research the omega-3s on fish. So that's when we were in Astoria, actually. I went to Oregon State and the seafood laboratory is in Astoria. What was kind of ironic looking back at the time, we were studying West Coast albacore tuna. So I was studying the omega-3 fat content, where it's distributed in the fish, what is the fat content, more in the belly, that kind of a thing. So that was kind of my main thing. And then we also were looking at different handling techniques. So if the fish was bled or if it was hit on the head, or how it was, immediately handled on board, and then correlating that with sensory. So actually taking that fish and then doing sensory analysis on it, and to say, okay, if it was quickly bled, or killed in a way that there was no shock or no adrenaline, then the meat is higher quality. So that's kind of what I was doing, and it was really just a natural fit from my upbringing in around fishing fields.
So I have a serious question now, because for one of the first, like we spoke before I heard the record button. I only lived for like last 15 years on the coast of the Atlantic, and as an outdoorsman, as an angler, I go often fishing on the charter boat. And the taste of the fish, like if you catch a mackerel or something and you spin up like a little cooker on the boat and you fry that fish there, or even you bring it home and that day you put it on the pan and you eat it, the taste of that fish is totally different than the taste of the same fish that you're going to buy in a supermarket. And the skipper told me, look, the boat is out for a week. They catch a fish, they freeze a fish. Before they come back, before they go to the processor, there's another week. Before the supermarkets distribute to all those branches, the fish that you're buying in the shop is at least 3 weeks old. That's the difference. So please tell us, me and our listeners and viewers, what is going on? Like, what's the difference? Like, what's going on? Why that fish is so tasty, and what's happening that then it loses its taste? And obviously, you also can tell us what is happening nutritionally. I presume something is happening nutritionally as well to that fish, right?
Right. Basically, if you think of it this way, as soon as that fish is pulled out of water, or killed, it's time temperature. That's just, the clock starts ticking, and you cannot stop that clock unless you freeze it. So you have the time temperature. So everybody talks about eating the freshest fish, the fresh fish, and that's true. When you're on the boat, I mean, we eat the salmon we catch on the boat, and we have this tiny little barbecuer. It's nothing fancy. It's tiny, and it's the best fish, hands down. It just is. So when you're at the store, I mean, same thing. It's just getting it from the water, then to the processor, then to the grocery store. That time temperature is just ticking. So we have this big thing where, everybody wants fresh fish, the freshest fish. And for Sena Sea, we haven't got into this yet, but what we do when we set out and said, okay, we're going to sell our fish. We know we're catching it. We have the proper handling techniques. The other things that can happen is just letting the fish flop on the deck. It's building up heat. It's building up lactic acid, and it's bruising the flesh. So just having a fish sit and flop on the deck is, you don't want to have that. That's going to affect the meat right there. Properly bleeding the fish. So if you get the blood out right away, that's going to affect the lactic acid. It will affect, and then a really big factor is just how quickly you get the temperature of the fish down. So are you getting it on ice, and how are you icing it? So we use what we call refrigerated seawater, RSW, where it's cold water. It's like a slush ice. And so bringing that temperature down, it's a matter of how quickly, in terms of minutes, how quickly you get the temperature down on the fish, you're going to preserve the quality. So I think of it as, it comes out of the ocean as perfection. All you can do after that is ruin the quality. You can't make it any better. You can just degrade the quality. So when we're doing Sena Sea, and we thought about this, especially with my background, when we decided, we're going to bring our fish that we've done everything right, we've handled it right, we're going to bring it to people, and we want to bring them the best quality that we can. And how do we do that? And everybody's fresh. And we looked at, how you can do that, and we bring it to Florida. And our answer was, bring it to the dock, cut it and freeze it. We vacuum seal it and freeze it at 20 below. And that's actually sashimi or sushi quality. You could eat it raw, but the freezing is the stopping. That stops the clock, and it's really the only thing. We actually wrap in parchment paper, and then we vacuum seal each portion. So we've been really amazed with the quality when you just take that fish, handle it appropriately, freeze it right away, and then the quality. I sent it to my dad. Gets a subscription box every month of our fish, and he's eating it in February, and he called me up the first winter he got it. He said, I can't believe it. It's February. I'm eating this fish. I feel like I'm on the boat.
Wow.
The quality of freezing, and it's one of those things where people get in their head fresh. And if your supply chain is too long, if you don't live at the coast by the docks, then I would say frozen. It's that misconception.
And then seasonality too plays a big part of, what's happening. And so we've really, stepped up our freezing and how we maintain, because we also run a processing facility too. So we're like the perfect of it comes in, we catch the fish, we process the fish ourselves, in our facility, and then we distribute it.
It doesn't get any better than this. So folks, tell me, because you're for our U.S. listeners, they can subscribe. You said you're saying subscription box. They can actually buy those fish from you. They don't necessarily need to live next to your dock.
Yeah, that's the real beauty. Is it's just in the United States. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, because we ship on dry ice. So we ship it frozen on dry ice. And the idea is just really, it really stems from how spoiled we are to have this fish in our freezer, and getting it to people in the Midwest, even the West Coast, where they can't get their hands on Copper River salmon unless their grocery store is doing some big special thing. It's just so limited. And so for people to have that access, and then we ship it to your door. So we have a website, and people order. You can order one time, but we're seeing a lot more people. We have a subscription option just for ease. Is really the easier we can make it to get fish to people's door and in their freezer, the more they're going to be able to eat of it. It's
SenaSea.com, right? That's I obviously gonna put the link in the description of the show. And how long that package can travel, or how long it's good? Like how long it can be in transfer, let's say.
I would like in storage.
Yeah, but where I'm heading with this, but because for all my European listeners, I'm always saying there's this service called myus.com, that gives you like a virtual address in the US, and then they're, get, so you can, from your perspective, you're just sending to the address in Pennsylvania or whatever else, and then they're sending it over to, all locations in the world, really, not only in Europe. So I'm just wondering, how long that package can travel, because maybe, even my European and UK listeners or Irish listeners can afford it.
Yeah.
What we do is, so we freeze it and then we keep it frozen all the time, and then we ship on dry ice. And the really hard thing about dry ice is it's colder than freezing, so it keeps it really premium level frozen, but it's sublimating all the time. So we ship overnight, and we pack with enough dry ice that it can last 2 days.
Okay, gotcha.
The dry ice is sublimating, and when the dry ice vanishes, the temperature goes up really fast. And so that's the really hard thing. And we had gel packs. It's hard. Gel packs can keep things cool, maybe at a safe temperature for a certain amount of time, but they're not going to keep it frozen. They're really actually defrosting at about the same rate as the fish. So it's really hard. And then dry ice, of course, is highly regulated for.
So probably that wouldn't fly with
it's really hard.
Don't say no. Let's try it.
Let's
get somebody to try it.
Yeah, you should try it.
She's got these amazing gel packs that are like batteries that stay frozen for long.
We do have some with what is it? Phase change material below freezing. So I have played around. I now a lot of what I do is about shipping and is about keeping fish cold. A lot of my efforts. So we pack with dry ice, but we also have these phase change gel packs that we are working with, and they aren't hazard. The dry ice is so tricky, but the gel packs keep it just below. So we use a combination, but it would be really interesting. I need to know how many days, once you order it, how many days it would take the additional, to get over to Europe. It's all about that time and how to keep it frozen.
I say we have a contest. Yeah.
We could keep it. I'd be really confident we could keep it cool, and then you have to eat it right away.
Yeah, we should have right now. We could definitely do it with fresh. I mean, so here's the beauty of what we do is, so when we're particularly fishing the Copper River, this fish comes in and it's less than 12 hours old. We, butcher it, fillet it, and then we cryovac it. So first we start off with the fish rinsed off in ozonated water, and it takes the slime off, it takes the fishy smell away, and this is a absolutely pristine, beautiful fish that's filleted then and then portioned, and then we use this system called cryovac, where it's much like for me, I think of it as Gore-Tex, where it's a vacuum sealed bag that allows air out and not in, so the fish can stay aerobic.
Yes,
and so
you don't want fresh anaerobic, and so it gives you a little bit more. It gives you more time on that fresh.
Yeah. So, like for instance, your example
so
of
that we could keep cool.
Yeah. So your example of getting 3-week-old fish at the grocery store, that as a processor on my end, that's an incredible shelf life that you have referenced an example of. Now, the system that we use, I would tell my customers you could expect 14 to 16 days, with the system that we use, and that's
at premium quality.
At premium quality.
Yeah. Premium quality. I think that's a key thing.
It's not going to fall off the backbone when you pick her up. So, and Sena's speaking. Funny enough, Sena's dad talked about when he first started fishing. That's the quality that they brought down. I mean, so the industry really has changed over the years due to this IFQ system, and that's the right. There we go. That's the segue into quality right there. It's this IFQ system now that we have. The consumer gets a far greater product. It is much, much better than it was, and it's whether it's fresh or frozen. I mean, the standards have just changed, and you really do get a really good product now.
Way back when my grandfather was fishing, I mean, they just went out and loaded the boat, and they would be out for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And so the bottom fish would be old.
They just pitchfork them right overboard.
And it was just done differently. And now that's not how it's done, and it's about smaller trips and bringing the fish back, and the quality level is just got to be such a difference. And with the IFQs, you can go out and the fishermen can go on their schedule, go in and go out on their own schedule and avoid bad weather and things like that. The
IFQ.
The derby days before was real different.
And I guess that's also different when the fish comes from like a small boat operators like you folks, rather than those big trawlers when they getting frozen and they're staying there in the freezing for like weeks on end. So that's a huge difference. Okay, so once again, senasea.com anyone who can is lucky enough can afford that, then they should go in order. I would do it myself.
We should talk, and because I never say no to projects, and it would be a really interesting project. See, I mean, I never had heard about the mailing from the United States over.
Mm-hmm. So, it's a great service. It's a great service because even what you can do, obviously not in your case, but they have a service that you can order from number of shops in a US, and they will wait until all the packages arrive and then package into one big package and send over. So they have a lot of cool services, and I think that when people who are registering for the first time, they have a 30-day premium service for free, and within the premium service, they have some sort of a discount in the first shipment.
We do have shelf stable products, retort, like jars, beautiful smoked salmon in jars and in retort pouches, and
so that probably and just by the way, for the avoidance of doubt, I am not sponsored by myus.com. Okay, I'm not, they don't even know about me.
Oh, dang it, really?
They don't know about me, but I would really like a lot of provide a value to my listeners who can buy that, and at the same time, if they buy in Europe, then you folks will get a value out of that as well. So listen, a couple of quick ones. So when it comes to processing fish and treating, you already alluded to that, Sena. For recreational anglers who are angling on a charter boat, on their own boat, what advice would you give them to make sure that the fish that they catch with rod and line is the highest possible quality, in terms of how to handle that fish, and then what to do between the time they caught a fish and the time that it lands on the frying pan?
Absolutely, it's getting that temperature down. So you want to handle it carefully. A quick kill, for lack of better words, but you don't want it flopping around. You don't want it building up lactic acid or heat or bruising itself. So being just simply gentle with it and then chilling very quickly. So having
removing the blood.
Yeah, you want to bleed it and then getting it on the ice.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How do you bleed it? You cut the gills?
Yeah, cut the gills. Probably. So we deal with a tremendous amount of sport fishing up in Alaska. And it's one of these things that I take this part of the job really serious, with the fact that I respect everybody's money and how much money and time it takes to get to Alaska. And these guys, some of them are on once in a lifetime trip, and they come up to Alaska and they catch this beautiful, salmon or whatever species it is. And then oftentimes, and this is no bullshit, I see them dragging their catch down the road on a fish string on the blacktop.
No,
and they bring it to us, and they expect us to work miracles.
Well, that's the thing. Rich has the processing facility in Cordova, so they do our fish. They do sport fishermen.
Yeah,
and you would think if you're, I mean, you're catching a few fish, really handling that
just like a baby. It's just like now we take this and you want to cut the gill, get this blood out of this fish, and as Sena alluded to early on, it's really, that is where this flesh deterioration begins. And then getting it on ice, like we provide, we have ice for our fishermen 24 hours a day so that they can chill their product down, whether it's sport caught or commercial.
They can come get ice before they go out, and bring the ice out with them, and just because that's
load their coolers up,
that's makes such a difference.
Huge huge, huge, huge. Handling, not grabbing it by the tail, grabbing it by the gills, because you all these little things that I see, these sport fishermen do, and it's just like,
Hmm.
I know that it probably cost you $10,000 to get up here, and here you just absolutely decimated that beautiful fish, and now I wouldn't even serve that to my dog.
No.
I mean, you got to like treat it with care.
If you're holding it by the tail, the backbone can sort of separate and then it can bleed out.
Yeah.
So that's where those little things, just even how you hold it. I mean, sometimes we can tell just photos of the way you would hold the fish. Even you can see people holding up their sport fish by the tail or something, instead of holding it with two hands like a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
That's a really good information. And what do you think about those who have a bucket with the water? Because this is what I also quite often seen here on the charter boats, where every fisherman has a bucket with the salt water, and they just unhook the fish and throw it into the bucket of salt water.
Sena just told you that the very first thing to consider is temperature. And so here you've taken ocean water. In our region it might be even as warm as 60 degrees. And so now we're taking this fish that we just took out of the water, and 60 degrees might be just because you reached down and grabbed it. Now 5 minutes later it's going to be 62 degrees, and it's going to be creeping up to
You're actually putting
the
in warmer
ambient air
water.
temperature. And now we're let's do a sous vide on our fish right in our bucket right now. So it really does come down to ice.
If you can put ice in that water, then you've got something.
Yeah. Because I guess that's also that fish. This is it's stress and the lactic acid and all the stress hormones probably building up in that fish. But it's probably not particularly relaxed in that bucket.
If it's thrashing in the bucket, then you have a real problem, because it's heating up itself and it's heating up that water.
We developed a bleed tank on my boat where I'm pumping 130 gallons a minute through this tank, and I take every fish. This is my kids' job when they come fishing with me. This is what they do, and they take the fish, they pluck a gill, and they put it into this tank where I have high pressure water coming through, and the fish bleeds out, and the quality is amazing. And then we take it and we pick it up and put it into our fish holds.
And you obviously also got the fish, right?
No, not for salmon, not on board.
No, not for salmon, but any other fish.
Yeah. For black cod, we do it round because there's once you start getting into several day long trips, like a week long trip, penetration on a round fish is with less penetrations is better.
So
it stores longer.
It's better if they don't cut into it. It just keeps it.
Yeah, you just want to bleed it, get that blood out, and that's where the your flesh deterioration really begins.
Okay. In other words, the advice for anglers is like, once you got the fish, like take care of it rather than because the instinct is like unhook that fish, chuck it in the side, and just keep fishing to catch more fish. But then that deteriorates the fish that you already caught. So you better take care of the fish that you caught properly, bleed it, put it on the ice, lower the temperature, and then keep fishing. At least that one that you have is a great quality.
Yeah, so hopefully you can have that wonderful experience of eating that fish when you get home. And a great point of what you brought up earlier about how awesome it is to eat that fish out on the boat. And oftentimes we try to replicate that at home, and it really kind of becomes our mission. And we can really tell the quality of the fish by how wonderful it is at home. On our boat, because we really do. I want to try to go out and buy the same little turdy barbecue and replicate everything that I do on the boat. And it's just the quality.
Folks, so give us all the information, how to where to find you, how to follow you on social media, all that jazz. I obviously gonna put all the links in the description of the show and in the show notes. But for those who are listening to that right now, please give it to us.
Yeah, I'd love it if you check out the website, Sena Sea, SenaSea.com. And then what's really great, what we're really active in is we have an email list that I do all the writing, and I take the time to educate our audience on everything fishing. We do recipes, but we also do seasonality and just talk about the fishing lifestyle. So that's really where it's fun to connect with people. So jump on our email list. And we have a family cookbook for how we cook fish and things like that, and trying to answer a lot of questions. So jump on, you'll see our family recipes, get a lot of information about us. And then we're fairly active on Instagram too. And that's especially fun during the season because that's where we're showing a lot of kind of just lifestyle family fishing in Alaska. So that's kind of fun to jump on and kind of join us.
Well, folks, Sena, Rich, thank you very much. It's been immensely interesting to hear all those things about the realities of fishing, about environment management, and then, handling fish and all that. Thank you so much for being on the show with us and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, thanks. If you ever want to come to Alaska, you're more than welcome.
I think that there's so many people I met through the podcast in the U.S. that I 1 year I might do like Tommy's Outdoors does the U.S. and kind of. So then I'm gonna take you up on that. I'll try that beautiful salmon from grill.
Yeah, you would have to. My business partner, who is just an unbelievable Alaskan, the real deal. You would just.
Well, he's also the hunter.
Yeah, he hunts and he's an amazing sportsman and an incredible fisherman. And he would just show you you would leave with your cooler full. So
I wouldn't want to leave.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to leave. It would be really cool. So you're welcome anytime, and we'd love to have you.
Folks, let's stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.